Before I begin, note a tiny amendment to the title of my talk today. A question mark has been added. While the staging of literary story within the 1947 exhibition remains the main thread, setting it in the interrogative mode will allow for a more reflective analysis, one that will come back to the issue of time and temporality, on which this great conference, that I am very happy to be a part of, even if virtually, is focusing. Post-war surrealist exhibitions constitute a symptom of the evolution of the group. In its use, surrealism was mostly a matter of manifesto. Signing one sufficed to grant you with the title of Surrealist. However, after 1945, it seems that participating in an exhibition and or seeing your painting hung in Breton's Rue Fontaine atelier would enable you to be called Surrealist. Initially based on manifestos and text, it appears, at least from the outside, that Surrealism has then turned into a movement devoted essentially to exhibitions and art creations. Of course, the fact that Surrealism is nowadays essentially known for its paintings, photographs, sculptures, and films makes it easy for us to consider that a text-centered movement has become image-centered. But let's play devil's advocate here and ask ourselves if that is truly the case. And sorry, it doesn't really work. As a matter of fact, hasn't Roland Barthes himself declared the contrary? Questioned about surrealism in an interview entitled Les Surréalistes ont manqué le corps, that he gave on May 13, 1975 to Le Quotidien de Paris, he indeed argued that images were free only in a rhetorical way for surrealists, and he added that what remains of them was too much literature. To Barthes, if surrealists were rightfully planning on turning writing into acts, they did not manage to go beyond appearances. Their group was a textual space, but they never embodied the true depths of fiction. Le surréalisme agit était toujours un geste, non une fiction. And it is my goal to show you today that at the 1947 exhibition, surrealism itself was exhibited as a canonical text that would soon be part of literary history. As a way of beginning, and because not everyone necessarily knows anything about that very exhibition that took place, I should remind you, between July and October 1947 in the Galerie Mag in Paris, let me briefly introduce it to you. And I should add also that apart from newspapers of the time and from the catalogue itself, I have used extensively the wonderful documents available online on André Breton's website to create this presentation. Here is, for instance, one of Breton's original letters to the participants. Of course, the fact that Breton had carefully kept everything having to do with this exhibition, from letters to sketches, makes it particularly interesting to consider in its genesis. There's a lot to be done here. On the ground floor, Les Surréalistes malgré eux was supposed to present together artists seen as the ancestors of surrealism and artists who had at some point been considered surrealists. Bosch, Archibondo, Rousseau, Blake, Magritte, Chirico, Picasso, Masson, Dali, and so on. There, Breton's letter to the participants put the stress on the importance of display windows. And I'll come back to this later. Ideally, Breton would have wanted each author, thinker, and painter to have one dedicated area. But in the end, paintings, photographs, and traces of writers were all mixed and exhibited together. Reviews of the exhibit, like the one written in the Cahiers du Sud by Pierre Guerre, reveal that this part of the show was the one that was truly not put into action as perfectly as what Breton had intended. Possibly because the recently banned Magritte and Dali were not very keen on participating, and Chirico wasn't either. To access the second floor, there were stairs to which I shall also come back later. On that floor, a labyrinth of 3 rooms as well as 12 altars could be found. And here you see a description of the 12th altar. Actually, the 12, one of them ended up not existing because here there are 13, but we'll come back to it. Devoted to the 12 zodiacal signs and presenting offerings and a mixed setting of paintings, objects, and sometimes pictures integrated as collage, the animist and Vaudou-like altars were at the very center of Breton's will to establish a new surrealist myth. And while I'm going to be clicking from one altar to the other, following the order established by Breton, note that finding photographs of all of them was not possible, but that Breton's preparatory dossier always presented texts, quotes, and sometimes images to help with the creations of these altars. Le Tigre Mondain refers to a book by Jean Ferry, and Jean Ferry was also among those invited to write a text for the catalogue, a very funny text, and I will not read it, but I think it's worth reading. La Chevelure de Falmer celebrates Lautréamont, who was also present on the first floor, so here is someone who was in the past, but also in the present. L'éloderme suspect sur le cactus tonneau is one of Breton's fetish animals, and a remembrance of his recent American trips. And here you can see that he kept a little picture of it that he brought from America. Jeanne Sabrenas is, of course, the heroine of Jarry's La Dragonne. Léonie au bois d'Ashby is dedicated to Rimbaud. L'oiseau secrétaire celebrates Max Ernst, and with a little collage. Le soigneur de gravité, Duchamp. Brauner's famous Loutable was given its own altar, and Breton himself was honored under the auspice of the Condilure, another fetish animal of his, and again it's a picture that he kept in his files. Raymond Roussel was a single author whose name was directly stated to refer to an altar, and he was also among those who had been presented on the first floor. So again, here we have a connection between the first floor and the second floor. Les Grands Transparents represented the pursuit, of course, of a surrealist myth initially developed by Duchamp. Finally, La Fenêtre de Magna Sed Apta was a way to evoke Georges Dumourier's Peter Ibbotson. And as you have surely noticed, even though I went very fast through these images, most of these authors actually had something to do with literature and were created in order to turn these references to texts into a magical and mysterious kind of initiation. The pagan ritual of the altars, here is a page of the catalog, was written by Kissler, was accessible only after having wandered in a labyrinth-like setting and having followed Duchamp's thread into what was described by Breton and Kissler as a hall of superstitions. Then you would wander into a room of multicolored curtains evoking rain, and finally you would be into a kind of billiard room. Here you can see actually both things. You see the rain falling, but you also see the billiard. Both rooms are very closed. The setting aimed at reproducing the different stages of an initiation, and the exhibit was set to unsettle, confuse, and astonish the visitors. So, now that you have a better idea of what this exhibition was about, let's come back to our initial question of the possible staging of literary history. Interestingly enough, the 1947 Surrealist exhibition played extensively with order and disorder. We could argue that window displays, as a principle of exhibition, objectified the very concept of pêle-mêle. And while I will not discuss this matter any further here, Anne Reverso will surely tell you everything you need to know about that question in her presentation in a few minutes. Also, if we simply focus on the symbolism of the items collected and exhibited, past and present are exhibited with the purpose of summarizing and representing surrealism. In the Galerie Mag, the display of the ancestors of surrealism on the first floor went along a possible constant reenacted of surrealism thanks to the altar of the second floor. In other words, having seen the past of Surrealism, visitors were given the possibility to try and reenact its present by wandering through a labyrinth and discovering mysterious altars. As Breton had written in the catalogue's preface, past could finally enable future. But it's not any past, it's un passé presque immémorial, and of course this is connected to memory. However, the stairs giving access to the second floor were made out of books, and they were actually all red books, as if tangible literary products, read by the color red, of course, as if tangible literary products mattered more than the images of the writer, as if concrete collection of books were more likely to give access to the new post-war surrealism than the photographs of writers that could be found in some of the first floor display windows. The tension between order and disorder is here replaced by a tension between known and unknown, magical mystery and historiography. These stairs, which led to a floor devoted to mythology, are indeed themselves quite esoteric, since they are organized on a tarot arcane. But at the same time, the books and the authors were clearly chosen by Breton, and they ground surrealism genealogically. In other words, the stairs were physically as well as symbolically at the intersection between the two floors. And instead of photography and images, instead of the lists that were found as early as the manifesto of 1924, an objectified literature of book objects had been chosen to establish the new surrealist myth of 1947. And I let you briefly look at the titles of these books. You see a lot of esoteric texts as well as romantic writers, and of course you have the presence of Sade, Rousseau. The one that's very important for post-war surrealism is Fourier, and Breton comes back to it quite often in his catalogue. Having seen this, no wonder then that the catalogue that went along the exhibition and presented a guide to it was itself a book object that played with the concept of time. On the cover, made out of a kind of old rose blotting paper, the crumbly cake-like breast is surrounded by black velvet. Remembrance of things past, just like the title of the quite negative review that the Time published about the exhibition in its July 21st issue of 1947, we could fantasize that the breast is made out of a very Proustian Madeleine cake. But the same Time issue makes such dream impossible, and I'm going to quote Time of the Time. Prominently displayed in the gallery window were 3 rubber female breasts mounted on velvet. As a matter of fact, the analysis of the breasts, recently done by museum curators who have very hard time conserving them, reveal that they were made out of a sort of foamy gum. Created by Marcel Duchamp in collaboration with Enrico Donati, the catalogue is hence a surrealist object. On the cover of the issues created for a larger readership, the picture of a woman's breast has replaced the creation. And with time, the photograph has survived better than its gum counterpart. Thought ahead or not, this work of time on the surrealist creation reveals that what was created to physically be touched has nearly vanished and cannot be touched anymore, while the image is what remains. Here again, the concept of surface and posture pointed out by Barthes prevails. It indeed seems that the surrealist object that survived is the one that alludes to the fantasy and not the one that attempted to act it out. And here you see the only surrealists on the margin who could act out the fantasy, of course, Bataille. And just like the catalogue, the 1947 exhibition was initially thought as a palace of senses, where touching would matter. But in the end, the exhibition remained a place to wonder and to attempt at deciphering what was visually offered. Maybe the fact that no less than 1,500 curious Parisians attended the opening day gave Breton cold feet. Just like Perret's project of sounds and musical surroundings had not been included, the initial idea of meals and food served at the altars was not pursued. One could argue that the image mattered more than anything else. But it is also surely because the 1947 exhibition has been created like a mysterious text offered to a few involved readers under the principle of elective affinities. Imitating New York 1942 exhibition, Duchamp's threads are not only a way to escape the labyrinth, they are lines and, as such, reconstruct the fabric of a wordless and disjointed text. Just like it was poetically argued by Herold in one of the catalogue's texts, everything is readable. Eagles, les aigles, objects, les objets, and beds, les lits. Si vous lisez au lit, ma demoiselle, emportez toujours avec vous un arbre à lire, ou même au lit, lisez votre lit. Yet, as Denis Chevalier has pointed out in an article written in R in July of 1947, the catalogue oriented visitors towards a single reading of the creation, as if didactism had to prevail. Surrealism used to be, according to him, a machine to create mysteries. It had yet, alas, become a machine to elucidate them. But isn't this very principle the idea of what Breton meant by the cryptogrammatic nature of life? Apart from reproduction of paintings, the catalogue presents the exhibition project and many texts that have to do either with myth, with the non-death of surrealism, or with the matter of liberty. Many writings are political or philosophical, but short prose texts and poems are also to be found. Just like reproduction of paintings are freely integrating into the text, without direct relationships into them or between them, short quotes by authors such as Pascal, Hegel, Turner, Novalis, or Saint-Just scatter the catalogue. And I will, of course, not have the time today to summarize the whole catalogue, but as a kind of glimpse, I will provide you with a quick overview of its four initial texts. Breton's preface, entitled Devant le rideau, clearly constitutes the point of contact between the catalogue and the exhibition, and several texts and images throughout the page of the catalogue also echo this preface. It is worth noticing that, on its second page, the catalogue presents two pictures, one of the International Exhibition of Surrealism from London in 1936, the other from another exhibition, and we've already mentioned it, that took place in New York in 1942. While such a historical grounding has to do with the remembrance of previous events, literary history is not far. As a matter of fact, in his preface, Breton himself initially comes back to the 1938 exhibition and goes so far as reporting a few of the newspaper's derogatory titles. At this point in the catalogue, images and text aren't perfectly connected with one another, and of course, this happens around Breton, who himself had an altar, or nearly two, in the exhibition. After Breton's essay-like preface, where we find quotations or allusions to William Blake, the character Peter Ibbetson, and again he is in the exhibition, and Thomas de Quincey, a text written by Perret is dedicated to superstitions and myths, and it hence follows the main theme of the exhibition. Bronner, who was also, as we have seen, present on the second floor with his Loutal, has then written an ironical and poetic invocative self-proclamation of royalty that initiates another possibility of myth. Finally, and I'm going to spend a little bit more time on that text, the third text, after Breton's preface, is entitled paysage, landscape, and it is signed by Henri Miller. In this translation from the English, Breton's Nadja has itself become literary history. It is presented by Miller as a magical text that one cannot forget. Interestingly enough, Miller considers that one of his first short pieces was a double of Breton's description of Blanche Derval's acting in Les Détraqués, and as you remember, that's the beginning of Nadja. And since Miller's first encounter with French literature that he narrates is Balzac's La peau de chagrin, Nadja acquires a nearly 19th century aura. Breton's novel is hence among those that one remembers, one that makes literary history. So, having considered both the exhibition and its catalogue, let us stop as a way of concluding on a catalogue page that is directly connected to the exhibition. It's not very clear, but I think you can see there's one painting on the left-hand side and another on the right-hand side, Le Gilet de Majakovsky et Pro Patria are the paintings, and then there's photographs of window display. So, there, the photographs of two window displays set up by Duchamp for Breton's book Arcane 17 and Le Surrealisme et la Peinture are reproduced. Made equivalent to the two paintings that go along them, these pictures are hence to be seen as the artistic creations they are. There is no difference between a window display and a painting. Yet, if we look more closely at these two window displays, they appear quite similar to the altars as well as to the way the first floor of the gallery presented Surrealist precursors. And here you see a beautiful picture where Breton is in the window himself. If we pursue the analogy, the displays prepared by Duchamp to sell Breton's texts after the war are nearly the same as the ones created for the new 1947 Surrealist myth. And the logic of the comparison could of course induce that Surrealism is at that time already for sale. But what truly matters for me is that the displaying of books and literature was reenacted and reused at the very heart of the Galerie Mag. In other words, a technique initially used for a literary object was directly transferred in order to stage the complex and multi-layered concept of Surrealism. As a result, instead of being touchable and livable as Breton has originally planned, Surrealism was turned into a rather static and eminently readable literary object. And while the Surrealist 1947 exhibition was created to develop a new Surrealist myth, its setting, its preparation, its catalogue, and its concretization actually helped turning Surrealism into literary history. Beyond the Galerie Mag, on the pages of the newspapers and books, the movement was quickly turned into a relic of the past. Elle a été sagement vernie. Both time and temporality were actually the essence here. Because the Surrealist focus was set on the instant of revelation that could happen to visitors in the labyrinth or in front of the altars, because static window displays were overused, Jean-Paul Sartre, who had been one of the many detractors of the movement since 1945, and who will have the last word today, Jean-Paul Sartre would rightfully compare Surrealism to the post-war consumption culture. Comme le surréaliste s'est ôté les moyens de concerter une entreprise, son activité se réduit à des impulsions dans l'immédiat. Cela ne nous surprend pas, le tempo favori de la consommation, c'est l'instant. Je vous remercie.